It all started the morning I closed on the house, a quiet little brick place on the edge of town, tucked just outside the sprawling reach of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA. A line on a map that to most people meant nothing, but to me meant freedom, peace, and finally being out from under the iron thumb of Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, who had spent years policing mailbox colors and lawn heights like she ran a military base instead of a neighborhood. The house was perfect. Big yard, surrounded by trees, and most importantly, not a single HOA fee in sight. But the peace didn't last long. The first day I moved in, as the movers were unloading boxes, I heard the shrill screech of tires and saw Karen's white SUV come barreling down the road, her license plate frame glittering with the HOA logo, her sunglasses perched like armor, and the second she stepped out, she didn't even look around. She stormed straight up my driveway like she owned the place, clipboard in hand, barking orders at my movers as if she was inspecting her property. "This house is part of Oak Ridge Estates," she declared, voice sharp as broken glass, "and you are not authorized to be here." I blinked at her, stunned for a second, before calmly telling her the truth, that this house wasn't under her jurisdiction, that I'd verified with the county records myself. But she didn't want to hear it. She marched up to my porch, jabbing her finger at me and shouting that I was trespassing on HOA-managed land, that the board wouldn't allow outsiders, and that I needed to vacate immediately before fines were imposed. My movers froze mid-step, boxes in hand, watching this woman lose her mind in broad daylight. I told her firmly, but calmly, that I wasn't part of her HOA, that this land was private property, but the word private only seemed to set her off more. Her face turned crimson, veins visible on her neck as she screamed about community integrity and enforcing bylaws, even though she had no authority here at all. It would have been funny if it weren't so surreal. Here was a woman so obsessed with control that she couldn't accept someone living free just beyond her grasp. And when she finally realized I wasn't backing down, she did something so unhinged I almost laughed. She turned to her husband, still sitting embarrassed in the SUV, and shouted, "Get the spare key from my bag," as if she was about to march into my house and claim it for herself. That's when I knew this wasn't just about rules or boundaries. It was personal. She wasn't going to stop until she'd made my life hell for daring to live outside her little empire. By the next morning, I realized Karen wasn't treating my move-in like a misunderstanding. She was treating it like a territorial invasion. I woke up to the sound of a car door slamming, and when I looked out my window, there she was again, pacing across my driveway with that same clipboard clutched in her hands like a weapon, her husband reluctantly trailing behind her, his face set in that resigned expression of a man who'd lost control of the situation years ago. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and before I could even say a word, she started snapping photos of my house, my license plate, even the welcome mat by my door, muttering to herself about documenting evidence for the board. I told her flat out that she was trespassing and needed to leave, but instead of listening, she smirked and said, "You can't trespass on HOA property." The sheer audacity almost made me laugh because according to every official map, survey, and county deed, the property line ended 50 feet before my mailbox. I showed her the proof right there on my phone, the official county GIS data, and she waved it away like a child rejecting vegetables. "Those records are wrong," she snapped, voice rising. "We manage this street. It's been part of the HOA for years." Then, without warning, she strode past me like I was invisible, marched up my porch steps, and grabbed the doorknob as if she intended to walk inside. That was it. I stepped in front of her, blocking the door, and told her one more step would mean the police. But instead of backing off, she doubled down. She shouted, loud enough for the entire street to hear, "You're trespassing in my community." My neighbors, most of whom had been pretending not to watch from behind their blinds, started peeking out, whispering, some recording with their phones.
It was the kind of chaos only Karen could create. Me standing calmly in my own doorway while she ranted like a dictator, her husband tugging at her arm, begging her to stop. I finally took out my phone and started recording because something in her eyes told me she wasn't bluffing anymore. This wasn't just her enforcing imaginary HOA rules. This was her losing control. And when I mentioned that I had every word she'd said on camera, she froze for just a second, realizing she was in over her head. But then, instead of retreating, she spat out the ultimate threat. "Fine, we'll let the police handle this," and stormed off to her SUV, tires screeching as she sped away down the street. I just stood there on the porch, shaking my head, knowing full well what was coming next. And honestly, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost.
An hour later, I heard the faint hum of engines rolling up my quiet street. Not one, but two black and white patrol cars gliding to a stop in front of my driveway, their lights flashing in the mid-morning sun. I took a slow breath, already knowing exactly who had called them. Karen's SUV was parked across the road, angled like a vulture perched for drama, and there she was, hands on hips, lips pursed, rehearsing her victim face. The officer stepped out, professional and composed, scanning the situation. One of them, a tall guy with mirrored sunglasses, approached me first. "Sir, we've got a call about a disturbance. Apparently, you're refusing to leave property that belongs to the HOA?" His tone wasn't accusatory, just procedural. I smiled politely and pulled out my folder. Yes, I had come prepared after last time. "Officer," I said, "you're standing on county property. This house isn't and never has been part of that HOA. I handed him the deed, the plat map, and even the correspondence from the county assessor's office confirming the boundary lines. As he skimmed through it, Karen came stomping over like she was about to lead a courtroom drama. "He's lying," she snapped. "That property was under HOA jurisdiction for over 20 years. Everyone knows it." Her voice trembled, equal parts rage and panic. The officers looked at her calmly, then back at the documents, and said, "Ma'am, this address isn't listed under your HOA's management area." You could almost hear the record scratch in her head. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, gasping for air. "What? That's impossible," she stammered. "It's our neighborhood." The second officer, clearly tired of the theatrics, crossed his arms and said, "Ma'am, if you step onto his property again without consent, it's trespassing. This isn't HOA business anymore." That single sentence hit her harder than any fine, any argument, any HOA regulation ever could. She sputtered about bylaws and voting rights, but the officers weren't having it. They politely asked her to return to her side of the street, and she reluctantly complied, though not without glaring daggers at me like I'd stolen her crown. One officer stayed behind to take a quick statement from me. I told him everything, from her barging into my yard to her false claims of ownership. He nodded, jotting notes, then said something that made me smirk. "You wouldn't believe how many calls we get like this. Some HOA presidents think they run the county." I laughed and thanked him for coming out. But as he turned to leave, I caught sight of Karen in her car, staring me down, her knuckles white around the steering wheel. She wasn't done. I could feel it. This wasn't just about property lines anymore. This was about control, ego, and the fact that for the first time in her life, someone had told her no.
I thought that would be the end of it, but with people like Karen, peace never lasts long. A few days went by quietly, the kind of calm that makes you suspicious. Then, one morning, I walked outside to grab my paper and froze. Someone had plastered half a dozen HOA violation notices all over my fence. My mailbox even taped one to my front door like a scarlet letter. They had no legal header, no signature, just the HOA logo and Karen's initials in the corner, written in that same aggressive scrawl. I almost laughed, but my patience had officially run dry. So, instead of tearing them down, I took high-resolution photos of every single one, printed them out, and attached them to a formal harassment complaint addressed to both the county sheriff's department and the HOA's own board of directors. But I wasn't done. I included the police incident report from the earlier visit, proof of my land's jurisdiction, and footage from my doorbell camera showing Karen trespassing and posting those fake notices. The next morning, the sheriff's truck pulled up again. Same officer, same calm smile. This time, he walked straight past me and went right to Karen's door. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the scene unfold like poetic justice in real time. She came out, flustered, clutching her bathrobe, her hair unbrushed, trying to argue that it was all a misunderstanding. But the officer wasn't buying it. He explained that filing false notices and trespassing after prior warnings could qualify as criminal harassment. Her face went from red to white, then back to red again, as she realized this wasn't another HOA meeting where she could bully her way through. The neighborhood had gathered by now. People filming, whispering, pretending to water their lawns while soaking up every second. The sheriff handed her a citation, clear as day, and told her any further contact with me would lead to arrest. She tried one last desperate move, shouting that I'd stolen community property, but the officer just motioned toward my mailbox and said, "Ma'am, that's his property and you've been warned." The silence that followed was glorious. The HOA board later reached out to me privately, offering apologies and claiming Karen had been acting independently, which we both knew was nonsense. But I didn't care anymore. I had peace, and she had consequences. For the first time, my porch was quiet, the air calm, no SUV idling across the street watching my every move. A few weeks later, a for sale sign appeared in front of her house, and not long after, a moving truck rolled up. Karen was gone. As I stood there watching it drive away, I couldn't help but smile. She'd spent months trying to control land she didn't own, a house she didn't manage, a life that wasn't hers. And in the end, all she managed to lose was her own home. Sometimes karma doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it just lets you watch in silence as justice rolls down your street like a sheriff's cruiser in the sunlight.